In this next iteration of the God of War franchise, Kratos leaves behind the Greek tragedy that was Olympus and enters the Norse saga. The story takes after the Norse mythology by involving prominent Norse gods and important events leading to Ragnarok. Initially, it appears there isn't much food in this largely inhabited realm, but there is an underlying story with the deceptively simple Jerky taking center stage. Most inhabitants in Midgard have either died or gone into hiding. One village to the north has been frozen in time, and it's a great model to use to understand how society used to be. The village is crushed beneath the frost giant Thamur. Before death, he had been constructing a wall to defend Jotunheim from Thor. Fearing Thor would arrive before the wall's completion, he sought aid from his son. His son refused to help, which frustrated Thamur. Resolving conflicts can be difficult, but with proper communication, a mutual understanding can be reached. We have Kratos here to demonstrate.
You would not listen. Boy!
And so, Thamur's son ran away after that.
Where are you?
In search for his son, Thamur eventually found himself lost in Midgard, shouting for his son's return. Unfortunately, Thor came to his call, and a battle between them led to Thamur's death. He died and fell onto a village, and with his final breath, froze everything instantly.
Can you read it?
Yes, sir. To Njord we offer back the sea's bounty.
Ah, yes. It was believed that Njord calmed the winds and seas for the fishermen. For that they loved and worshipped him here.
The people of this village worship Njord, the Vanir god of the seas, for he blessed their trawls with bountiful fish. In their gratitude, they offered some of their bounty, with the intention of strengthening the bond between mortals and gods. Their offerings did not go to waste. They seemed to have been very prosperous and even had enough fish to sell. The fish the village kept for themselves were sent to the Jarl's main kitchen. Jarls were people of nobility who were wealthy enough to afford their own ships. And the Jarl here has been gone for a long time now, but at least he was enjoying his last meal in his throne at the great dining hall. I'm not exactly sure what they ate, but in their final moments, it seems they were enjoying vegetables and meat, and I'm certain they would have also been enjoying some of their fish. Along the coast, some of their fish is left on a drying rack to make harðfiskar, a traditional Icelandic treat. From what I've read, it's really tough to chew, but very flavorful and usually eaten with butter. The cold wind protects the fish from insects and bacteria, and although this process takes some time, it will remain good for many months. It means people who travel to buy from the village's surplus of fish can rest assured knowing their food will not spoil when they return home. This important trade route provided many families with food, and it also provided an excuse. Children often grew up believing their fathers left them to go to the gas station to pick up a pack of fish, instead of, learning their dads got lost at sea. And speaking of which, there are many wayward spirits of former crewmen around the Lake of Nine. It's possible one of these spirits used to work for the Jarl based on what one of them explains.
I came to this lake with a group of tradesmen, seeking refuge from the Desolation. But how could we know it was even worse at the Lake of Nine?
The Vanir-Aesir War has been indiscriminately destroying lives, which makes it surprising to find anyone who has remained in Midgard.
That war. So many lives lost. What I didn't know was Thor had already gone on a killing spree of giants.
What do the giants have to do with the war between the gods?
Nothing at all, lad. That's the tragedy of it.
One of the last settlements struggling to survive were the Reavers, a group of people plundering resources however they can. They are first encountered at the Jotunheim marketplace. They have resorted to cannibalism, but do so methodically. At some point they learn to keep their victims alive as they eat them limb by limb to prevent their reanimation, and I suspect that knowledge came as a harsh lesson. Not much of their equipment was found nearby, and further ahead a ruined settlement can be found. I believe the Reavers had occupied this space until recently, when the base came under attack by Hellwalkers, forcing them to rush to safety, leaving behind most of their tools. Being ill-prepared for the journey, some men may have been sacrificed as food unwillingly. It would explain the large amount of draugr at the marketplace. Stealing and cannibalism are not good long-term strategies. Surviving requires a reliable source of food despite the climate and danger. More capable individuals have learned to feed themselves by living off the land in a few different ways. Hunting and fishing are efficient methods for collecting food. The dwarves, Brock and Sindri, for example, often travel between their different workshops, at least until they settle themselves in Tyr's temple. Before then, Brock used to have a beast of burden carry his supplies and provisions, and you'd think that a companion would prove to be a valuable asset, but once she stopped producing milk, Brock had to butcher and eat the beast. I believe Brock had no choice but to adapt, and I believe he was also short on food considering he wasn't exactly eager to share his food in this instance.
I'm not hungry.
Good. It's not what I was offering.
He also originally refused to give Kratos and Atreus food when they first meet, as detailed in the God of War novelization. I don't suppose you have anything to eat in those packs, the lad's stomach rumbled. Where are your manners? Brock scolded himself. Nope, nothing to eat in those packs. He returned to the axe. Dejected, Atreus retreated to sit near the smoldering remains of an abandoned campfire. Of course I got something to eat. Grab you some out of that pack there, Brock offered with a grin after a few moments. The book continues to explain some of the other food Brock had with him, and some of which was dried meat. Food doesn't seem easy to come by, even for dwarves that can travel easily. You may be skeptical of how I interpreted Brock's dialogue. Fair enough. However, also consider Brock expresses concern for his brother's well-being, hoping he is eating well.
As if it were dangling off his chut. You eating well enough?
The next time we speak with Sindri, we learn that he's alright.
Brother wanted to know if you're getting enough to eat. I guess I could tell him you are.
Brock was asking about me?
Was there meat on his breath?
He at least had enough apples to share with Kratos and Atreus, and he not only had an extra fish in his bag, which he offered to Kratos in the book, but he also keeps some skewered fish nearby. It could be that Brock was only concerned for his brother because Sindri forgets to eat, but hunger eventually builds to the point where it can't be ignored. I just think Brock has a habit of coming off aggressive when concealing his true emotions and concerns. Even someone as attuned to the animals and forest as Freya has to hunt and fish. In the book, she provides Kratos and Atreus food a couple times. She has given them dried rabbit and dried venison, along with extra food like small biscuits and an assortment of dried fruits. In her backyard, she has a few hunting traps which she undoubtedly used to catch rabbits. Also, she has caught a lot of fish and is drying some of them to make hartfisker. And because she lives isolated from everyone, she needs to have a supplementary source of food. She might have days where she doesn't catch any fish or hunt any game. She has also managed to grow some crops in her garden. She has some grain, which could be barley or wheat. There are mushrooms ready to be picked, herbs which she dries in the cave underneath her home. She also seems to have grown some vegetables and harvested them earlier in the season. Although blurry, the color suggests she was eating maybe beets and turnips. Most of her crops reflects accurately on what Norsemen were able to grow historically. Agriculture was not very well developed because the climate in Scandinavia is very cold. The terrain is rocky, and the soil is poor, particularly in the northern areas. Winters are longer, which limits the window for growing food. Only some crops were able to be grown in these conditions, such as grains, turnips, cabbages, and leeks. Preserving vegetables was necessary to survive long winters. This is why the book and the game include mostly just dried foods like the dried meats, fish, and fruits previously mentioned. With the proper tools, plan, and skills, it's possible for anyone to live here. Kratos and his family were able to live off the land for many years, even going as far as building their own home. Before her time came to an end, Faye helped feed the family as explained by Atreus. She taught him to hunt, and the book goes into much more detail than what is shown in the game. Atreus is sick of eating badger, and it's mentioned quite a few times in the book. But it can't be helped. Badgers are the easiest thing for the family to hunt. Although I didn't find any dried fish in their home, the book mentions they pack dried meats at the beginning of their journey. The cold climate makes hunting more suitable. Any fresh game needs to be field dressed as quickly as possible. Organs and blood are removed, while taking care not to rupture the gut or else the bacteria from within will contaminate the meat. The animal is eviscerated so that the corpse will cool down as quickly as possible, another important measure in preventing bacterial contamination. This is a greater concern when hunting in temperatures above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but the freezing climate in Midgard means they have some more time to field dress the animal. Any leftover meat they want to preserve would need to be the leaner parts of the meat, because during the drying process, fat is going to turn rancid despite a salt cure. The family also managed their own garden, although it was probably Faye who contributed the most. Even though the garden has been mostly destroyed by a fire troll, some crops survived, letting us know what the family ate. They had been growing tomatoes and what seemed to be blue flax flowers. Not only is there a resemblance, flax was common for Norsemen to grow. It would go on to be used in breads, which is what Kratos also added to their provisions at the beginning of the book.
Ah, a skiing dew from my homeland. Used to have one of my own back in the day. You should take it, boy.
Yes, boy. Take it. We might need to butter bread somewhere in our travels.
This is why no one likes you.
Speaking of bread, the garden had also been tilled for wheat, just like Freya did with her garden. But they didn't use wheat for just bread. They at some point used some of it to thatch their roof. Growing and processing wheat into flour is a lot of work, so you're going to want as much of a return as possible. After it is reaped, it needs to be threshed, which means beaten to the ground or beaten with a flail so that the chaff is removed from the stalk. Afterwards, the chaff is separated from the grain, and this was traditionally done by winnowing. It's the process of using a light breeze to separate the chaffs from the grain as it falls into a separate container. Only then can the resulting grain be milled into flour, ready to be used for bread. To get the most out of their wheat, the leftover stalk that was threshed from the grain can be dried to be used as material for a bed or a roof. In addition to their roof, all of their cooking implements were modeled with historical accuracy. It was common for Nordic homes to have an open fire pit to roast meats and cook vegetables and breads. Alternatively, a pot of water could be brought to a boil using hot stones which were heated in the fire, and a nice, hearty stew could be made from vegetables and meat. No matter if you look to the past, present, or future, to survive in Midgard is to rely predominantly on dried meats and fish. Venison jerky was my first choice, but it's trickier to prepare safely, and unless you or someone you trust provides you with properly handled deer meat, I wouldn't recommend it. Even if I am being overly cautious, I think beef is more readily available and there are less variables to be mindful of. You can use any lean cut of beef, but here I chose to use eye-round cut since it was on sale. If your cut has any fat, be sure to cut it off because it will turn rancid. It's easier to work with a partially frozen cut of meat. I set mine in the freezer for an hour before cutting into it. Slice the meat into very thin strips, ideally less than a 1/4 inch thick. Slice with the grain if you want a tougher jerky, or slice against the grain if you want it softer but it will be a little more brittle. Season both sides with salt and black pepper. Normally, you can use bamboo skewers, but I forgot to soak mine in water overnight, so I had to use metal skewers. First, cook the beef to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This step is important because bacteria will become heat resistant should you try to dry in the oven if it's set too low first. Cook in the oven at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes and then check the temperature with a meat thermometer. Afterwards, lower the oven to 160 degrees Fahrenheit and leave the door cracked open with a wooden spoon. This allows moisture from within the meat to escape, while keeping it warm enough so that the oven still has a temperature of 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Let the jerky dry for 3 to 8 hours. It's a large window of time because there are variables such as the thickness of your meat and the humidity of the room. I checked on it after 2 hours and then again 30 minutes later. To check the doneness of your jerky, let it cool down before bending a piece. Ideally, it will crack, but not snap broken. Begin by combining barley flour and whole wheat flour, butter, salt, and crushed flaxseed with water in a bowl. It will be tougher to knead than traditional bread since it isn't very glutinous. Once it has been combined thoroughly, let the dough rest for an hour with a clean cloth covering it. Afterwards, form a small, thin disc, probably a little thinner than what I have here. Bake in the oven at 340 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. When the bread has cooled down, take Kratos' wisdom and spread butter on that shit. Then realize, oh dear, Papa Kratos should have used honey instead. While he may not have found it in Midgard, honey was the only natural sweetener Norsemen had access to. It took this bread from being very bland and something I wouldn't ever make again, to pretty darn good and something I wouldn't make still, but I'd eat it if someone made it for me.